Informed Choice Radio, episode 499, Irish Fire, with Michael Houghton.
Live from Sundial House Studios, this is Informed Choice Radio. Want to make the most of your money and your life? You've come to the right place. Now, here's your host, Martin Bamford.
My guest on the podcast today is Michael Houghton, host of the Irish Fire podcast. Michael originally hails from New Zealand, but he's lived in Ireland for the past decade. He graduated from the University of Auckland in 2005 with a Bachelor of Commerce, majoring in Management and Entrepreneurship. In the time since, he's established businesses in a variety of industries, including e-commerce, IT services, financial trading, and forestry. Now, I'm a huge fan of having conversations about FIRE, that's financial independence, retire early, and I'm increasingly learning that no two FIRE practitioners follow exactly the same path. In our conversation today, we touch on a couple of really important points, so do listen out for these. Firstly, the importance of not exchanging your time for money. Michael describes financial independence as a time freedom journey. I think that's a really important concept. And secondly, we talk about legacy, making the best possible use of that time and freedom. So Michael is active within his local community. He's establishing new junior hockey clubs, as well as establishing new native forests in Ireland. Unlike many FIRE practitioners, Michael believes in taking a more hands-on approach to investing. I found that really interesting too. So here's my conversation with Michael Houghton, host of the Irish Fire podcast, in episode 499 of Informed Choice Radio. So Michael, perhaps you could start by telling us a bit about you and a bit about your background and about your journey, really, because today really is about your journey towards financial independence.
Very much so. It's actually been 10 years today, Martin, since I actually arrived in Ireland. So it's been 10 years on the dot since I first touched down here. So I'm actually from New Zealand originally, and I never anticipated living in Ireland. It was never on the radar. And I think sometimes this is what happens in terms of life. Sort of you roll the dice and something happens. And I happened to meet my wife 2 days after arriving here, and one thing led to another. And sort of 9 months later, I was coming back and moving here for good. So it's been a fairly big journey. And you know, financial independence is one of those things where my own background is I'm a web developer. So I know that you've got your own agency as well, Martin. So you've probably experienced this firsthand as well, as the ultimate in terms of selling your time for money. And very much it was a case where I'd work hard all year. I was basically freelancing. I've been doing that for the last 15 years. Would get to Christmas time, would sort of, pay for Christmas. You'd look at your books in January and go, we're still where we were last year. Nothing's improved. I've put all this time in. And even though the hourly rate was increasing and everything was kind of going in the right direction, we still didn't have any money left over. It was just the outgoings were eating us alive. So kind of sat down with my wife one day and I said, look, this has to change. And we immediately got on top of our expenses. So that was the first thing, just started tracking them and really getting on top of that. So I started to look for ways where I wasn't going to be selling my time for money, and started, I guess, working more like probably yourself, your agency does, Martin, with working more of a product basis, or at least fixed pricing and kind of quoting and, being paid for my expertise rather than my time. Because as a web developer, I'm extremely efficient. I'm extremely good at what I do. And, you're probably the same. You've done it 1,000 times before. So you're just going in and doing the same thing again with a slightly different variation. So very much a case of changing that and changing that mindset around that. And we started doing that sort of the start of 2018, and within the first 2 years, we managed to save and invest 92,000 euros. Wow. So it was a complete sort of game changer for us, and very much just keep going about that and just keep on that. And the funny thing is, Martin, we're so much happier for it. I think that's the big thing of moving away from consumer spending and stuff like that has really made us feel much better about our own situation.
There's some great nuggets in there. If you don't mind, I'll try and unpack a little bit. One about not exchanging your time for money. There's that famous parable that probably isn't true, probably never happened, about Picasso sitting at a street cafe in Paris, and a lady asks him for a sketch, and he sketched it quickly and charged her 10,000 francs for it or something. And she says, well, that only took you a minute. And he replies, well, no, madam, it took me my entire life. Yes. We fall into this trap, don't we, of giving away our time for money when actually there's a better way. So what was your realization? You sort of said you got to the end of a year, you realized you were back to square one almost. What made you realize there was a different way?
I was the ultimate time sucker, right? So I actually used to track my time to the nearest minute. And then at the end of each month, I would send the client the invoice based on the time that I spent. And I remember sometimes I would go in to, go into for a toilet break or something and say, look, I've got 3 minutes work left for the day. I've just got to go out and finish this. And we all know you're not doing anything inside 3 minutes, right? There's no productivity there. So it was very much a case where if I didn't go to work, I basically, the business didn't get any money, and I couldn't take any time off because it was basically no money coming in. So I put myself into that kind of trap, and it was a horrible, horrible trap where I had no joy because I was literally trading time for money. And so it was very much a case where I had to sit down and go, right, how can we do this differently? There must be a better way. And, I started to look at other professions to see how they were doing it. And I remember one time I had a handyman come over. I am absolutely hopeless with DIY, Martin. You wouldn't want me to go anywhere near anything. And I just needed a cabinet put up. And it was very much like the Picasso story, actually. And I was happy to be working in the kitchen that day. And he came in with his buddy, and they grabbed the cabinet. And I went down to my computer and I started tracking my time like I do. And 2 minutes went by. And I had to stop the meter because he came out and said, we're finished. That'll be 20 euros, thanks. So I sat down and I worked out his hourly rate based on the 2 minutes of work he had done and just thought, he has just made a killing. Now, obviously, there was some travel time and so on. And it was that realization where I thought, well, hang on, how long would that have taken me to put that cabinet up? Well, it would have taken me probably an hour, maybe 2. And then it would have fallen down a week later. Would have had to replace the cabinet. So when you looked at the opportunity cost there, that was very telling. And I started to realize that my clients didn't actually care how long something took. As long as I delivered and I was giving them something of value, let's say I'm charging market rates, but I'm delivering that service much quicker and to a much higher quality, then everybody kind of wins in that scenario. So it was taking that mindset and adapting that and realizing, look, I am good at what I do. Charging by the hour can only get you so far. And I was getting to a stage of new clients where I'd come along and go, look, I'm going to charge you this much an hour. But by the way, I'm extremely efficient. And so that'll work out really cost effective for you. But they couldn't get over the fact that I was trying to charge that hourly rate. Right. So that was kind of a blocker that I hit. And so moving away from that and going, look, I'm going to charge you at a fair market rate, but it's on then me to deliver was a much sort of better way for me to, I guess, increase the income without impacting on the client. The client was still happier. In fact, the clients have been happier since I've adopted this method rather than just sending a timesheet over at the end of each month.
And I guess there's a bit of a cultural issue here as well. With so many of us, it's ingrained in us that we'll arrive at work at 9 o'clock in the morning, we'll finish at 5 o'clock, and it's not so much what gets done or what the output is. It's what we put in. It's the clock watching at the end of the day, which I've always hated. So it's almost a mindset thing we have to get over.
Yes, fully. And I guess this leads on to what happened next when I adopted this system, which is why it gets kind of exciting. I think that we are ingrained, exactly what you said, to work 8 hours a day, or at least feel like we are working 8 hours a day. And I sat there one day and I went, right, I've adopted this system. And at this stage now, once I got the system working, I was charging, my day rate was massive because I got so good, I was so focused. But I started to notice that towards the end of the day, my productivity would be a lot less than the start. And for anybody that's done back-end computer programming, it is like doing maths equations for 8 hours a day. And so there was a certain point where it just didn't make financial sense for me to keep going. And so I sat down one day with the wife and said, look, what if I were to cut down and just do part-time? Cut down from 8 to 4 hours, and let's see what happens when we start doing that. Because remember, at this stage, I'm already investing money anyway. I'd kind of found the optimal number of clients that I wanted. I didn't want any more clients. You start to get to the stage where you got too many masters. You almost feel like a slave when you got all of these. You've been pulled left and right. And so we did it. And the hardest part about moving down to part-time work was actually exactly as you said, moving away from that mindset that you must work 9 to 5. And so I started working 9 to 1, and I did that for 6 months or so. And then I sat down with the wife again. I said, look, I'm now doing 4 hours. Let's cut down to 3 hours. And so that's where I've kind of sat now. So I typically do a 3-hour day, or at least if it's a good day, it's going to be a 3-hour day. Now, there's some days where it runs longer. Again, it's on me to produce the outcome. And basically I'm saying, right, I need to bill X per day, and I need to make sure that I can produce enough work to show that. But that's kind of the mindset that I would have. And it's extremely motivating to get up each day going, right, here we go. It's on me to produce the goods and to find the work that the client's going to be happy paying for when they receive that invoice.
You talked as well as part of the early part of your FIRE journey was tracking expenses and minimizing expenses. So what did you discover when you started looking at where the money was going each month?
Yeah, just the amount of waste, the amount of share waste. Food is a great example. The amount of grocery shopping that we would do when you wouldn't even check the fridge or freezer at home, and you'd come home and you go, oh, there, we already bought that. The amount of food that we were chucking out. Just, a lot of the things that we would buy that we would deem emergencies or just in case purchases. We also had a bad habit of, and this is very much an Irish thing as well, and it's probably similar in the UK, every Saturday was shopping day, going to the shopping mall and just buying bags upon bags of stuff that would sit in a spare room in our house. And I remember one day coming in, opening the room, and the bags from the previous week were still there sitting in the bags. And I kind of we have to stop doing this. This is not sustainable. So it was very much a way of, by the way, Martin, this stuff took a long time for us to get out of bad habits. It takes a long time to get into those habits, and then equally takes a long time to get out of those habits. And it was the fact that we started seeing more free time for myself, and I was able to help out pick the kids up from school, be there after school to help with homework and so on. So all of that good stuff, when you start to realize that freedom, you realize that the best thing that your money can buy is your own time and your own freedom. And I think that that's been the biggest realization that we've had. And yeah, look, we had to make some sacrifices. We have 3 very young kids, and we went on holiday in 2018. I remember we spent $5,000, $6,000. It was quite a lot of money. We went away for 2.5 weeks, but we came back with absolutely no relaxation that whole time. And we kind of sat down and was that money worth it? And the answer was a straight no. And so we didn't go on holiday last year. We planned on holidaying in Ireland this year. But when you're working less anyway, you don't have the same need and desire. There's no burnout effect. So we're just as happy waiting a couple of years. And as it was, we wouldn't have been going overseas this year with the COVID situation anyway. But we kind of asked ourselves, are we going to enjoy that? If we're going to spend that money, is it going to be something which we should be spending our money on? Or are we potentially going to be spending money and regretting that purchase? So that's really been a big part of it. And, it's an interesting journey on that sense. We don't probably enjoy our money as much as we should sometimes, but we are very conscious of basically saying, right, if we are going to spend some money today, is that going to make us happy? Is it going to bring us closer to our overall goal?
That's a really interesting one. It's making that link, isn't it, between the money that's being spent, or in this case not spent, and actually what you get from it. And I know so many people who work hard week in, week out, and almost live for that 2-week summer holiday when they go to Spain or somewhere, or Portugal. And you've got to wonder, like you said there, whether actually if they had a slightly different lifestyle for the majority of the year, they would still need that expense and that release for the minority of the year, and actually making that change. You mentioned, Michael, about happiness and sort of finding happiness through this. And that's an interesting one for me as well, because there's been lots of studies around commercialization and consumerism, and how actually owning more things doesn't necessarily lead to happiness. So when you stopped those Saturday morning trips to the shopping mall, what did you learn about how content you were with what you had been buying and what you were spending money on in the future?
Yeah, I think, going shopping is stressful, with kids especially, and getting up every Saturday to get the kids ready, to drag them around, they weren't happy. So it was a case where it was exactly as I kind of touched on earlier, that we realized that this consumerism lifestyle that we had adopted was certainly not making us happy, certainly wasn't making the kids happy. And the value of just spending time together led to so much more happiness. For me to just be able to sit down with the kids and go, right, guys, what do you want to do today? I have a habit with the kids of each. I've got 3 of them, 3 boys of each of them going, what special thing do you want to do with Daddy today? And I always make a habit of doing something every single day. And sometimes it's exhausting. Sometimes it gets to 7 o'clock at night and you haven't done it and they're reminding you and all of that. But I make sure that every single day I do something that they want to do, because kids don't want to go shopping. It's something which, yes, there is some shopping that needs to be done. But again, if anything, COVID-19's taught us that we can live off a lot less. For a lot of people who maybe have retained their income, they're probably sitting on a lot of cash right now because they just haven't been able to spend their money. And in many ways, it's actually taught us that we could actually go further than we are. So it's that concept again of trading off what's the opportunity cost and what can you be doing better. And since I actually did that, and again, since moving part-time, it's a question now of what do you do with that time. And so probably for the first few months, it was great. I was going for walks, just helping out with the kids at home and things like that. But after a while, you kind of go, right, well, is this it? Is this all I'm going to be doing? And I started looking at the bigger picture. So I've been involved with hockey clubs, field hockey clubs here in the past. And there's at the time, there was a massive waiting list. Like if you were a girl born in Limerick, which is the city where I'm from, unless you put your daughter down when she was a week old, she was not going to ever play hockey. That's basically what it was like. And I kind of sat there one day and said, you know what, this has to change. And even though I've got 3 sons, I wanted my sons to go and play at a different hockey club, which is far closer to me, where boys weren't allowed to play. It was a girls only hockey club. And I said, well, hang on, that's not right either. And so I started my own hockey club and got the wheels in motion. And again, the time allowed me to do that. And it became an overnight hit. I had basically got 120 members. We never had a waiting list. And I remember people would come up to me in the schoolyard going, I've forgotten to put my daughter's name down. Is it too late? No, not at all. Bring her down. She's more than welcome. So we started that. But then, Martin, that led to another thing. I suddenly had Hockey Island on to me saying, how were you able to do this? Can you help us? And with that, 4 more hockey clubs have since been started because of my blueprint and me trying to get things going. So we've managed to get five new hockey clubs. We've had 200 kids playing in 2019. We would have had 600 kids playing this year, bar the COVID situation. But I mean, that's just now on the back burner. So, again, it's one of those things of what does extra time give you and how can you actually utilize that to actually make a difference in society?
I love this, and I think this is just a great example of how FIRE and financial planning is not necessarily about the money. It's about these sort of fantastic feelings you must get from having changed the lives of so many children and given them access to a valuable sport and experience like that. That's just incredible. When you started on this journey, what was your goal? What was the target? What were you aiming for? I guess both in a financial sense, but also in a sort of lifestyle sense, like you've just talked about.
Yeah, do you know what? It was always a financial thing initially. It was always that hatred of getting up and selling your time and that feeling on Monday morning of getting up. And I think the biggest ironic thing with the whole experience, Martin, and this is sort of 2.5 years into it now, is I now love Monday mornings. Right. I even if I hit my FI number, I would still work for the clients that I do. I enjoy every single day. I almost work, even though I'm only working 3 hours a day now, if you looked at my overall kind of what I'm working on and the side hustles and everything else, I'm probably working a lot more, but it doesn't feel like work. So it's very much been a journey. Financial independence is a time freedom journey. That's what it is. And it's a question of what would you do if you didn't have to go and work. Basically, if you didn't have to go and live somebody else's dream, if you got to live your own dream instead. But as it went on, it became about finding opportunities, changing the world for the better. Sort of looking around and saying, nobody else is going to do this. Why can't I be the guy that actually gets up and does this? And kind of having that kind of inspiration and that feeling of, I can make a difference. You mentioned earlier about the hockey clubs and that feeling that gave me. For me, the feeling that was amazing was they've all got these little hockey hoodies that they wear. And when you're just driving around or whatever and you see a kid wearing the hockey hoodie, that was because I did that. You know what I mean? If I hadn't got up, that kid's life has changed because of something that I did. And so it's an amazing feeling to have. And I've since extended that, by the way. I mean, I'm now working on a native tree project here in Ireland where I'm trying to plant, ideally my goal is 1 million native trees. Wow. That's what I'm trying to plant. But look, that's early days. I've bought some land here. So, I started to look at my investments and say, right, could I be investing in better things? Because I was, buying gold and things like that doesn't do anything. Right? It doesn't actually help anybody necessarily. It's just trading a commodity. Whereas what if I were to buy, say, some land, plant some native trees on it, offset all the carbon, allow people to visit that forest in years to come, something that, my children's children can enjoy. And think bigger picture, think far, far bigger picture. And so that's kind of where I've sort of started to progress now. And yes, that may mean that my financial independence journey takes a little bit longer. Maybe that investment isn't as good as it possibly could be, but I'm actively doing something to actually help people and, kind of getting people on board with what I'm doing as well. And they're seeing what I'm doing now. And they're sort of starting to say, look, how can we get involved? How can we actually help and be part of this as well? So it's quite exciting when you kind of look at it that way. And again, you're growing something from the ground up and you're seeing things actually happen.
COVID-19 right now, we're living through unprecedented times, very challenging times. What changes has the coronavirus pandemic caused in terms of your FIRE journey and how you're living your life day to day?
Yeah, it's definitely had an impact, hugely, in fact. Like in regards to index funds and any sort of shares like that I had, I was happy. I'd been looking for something like this to happen because I knew that history had shown that if you hold out, there's a saying in the share market that those who are patient will make money. It's a transfer of wealth from the impatient to the patient. So when things hit, I started adding more money into the index funds, which is great. And most of my index funds, by the way, are within a company pension that I have in Ireland, similar to the UK, but actually worse in Ireland. We are taxed personally to the hilt, so we own very little personally, and most of our wealth is kept in companies or in our company pension. I immediately called up the pension company, and I remember they couldn't deal with me. This was mid-March. I couldn't get them on the phone, and I finally got them through. And I said, look, when am I going to get confirmation that this, I added another 1,500 euros to the pension or whatever. When am I going to get confirmation that this is going to happen? And they said, look, Mr. Houghton, we're so busy at the moment that it's going to be a couple of weeks until we get this confirmation through. And I kind of got off the phone. I talked to my financial advisor, and he said, Mike, everyone's selling. And I said, right, well, this is the time for me to be buying then. And look, that's worked out quite good so far, which has been great. So from that point of view, it was very much just sit and hold and be patient. Unfortunately, I also had some investments in peer-to-peer lending platforms. A lot of them haven't done so well the last couple of months. A few of them have been sort of exposed as scams and things like that. So look, I've lost a little bit of money in those, and that's certainly been an eye-opener. And I think for me, it's been very much a case of me going, right, look, this is why if I could be more active in my investments in terms of if I'm buying land or maybe if I'm buying property, that maybe that's a better way for me to actually invest. I think when you've got time freedom, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. And I'm a little bit of a control freak sometimes as well. Handing your money over to somebody else, you don't always know where it's going to go. There's sometimes a lack of transparency there. Whereas if I can be in control of that, then if mistakes are made, at least I'm going to learn something from it. And something better may come of it anyway.
That's an interesting one, because I know lots of fire practitioners are very much into the hands-off approach to investing, aren't they? But I think you're discovering your personality drives you more to the hands-on approach, and I guess the time and the freedom frees up that opportunity to be more hands-on.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I mean, I enjoy the investing aspect. I enjoy being able to use my money to do something good with it and maybe get a return out of it as well. And I would kind of challenge those fire people as well. And look, I've met a lot of them along the way to say, what are you going to do with your time? If your investment is entirely passive, which, by the way, I'm not even convinced that there's such a thing as truly passive investing. Like even if you're in peer-to-peer lending, you still got to go through and make sure everything's working. I'm involved now in a couple of lawsuits against some of these platforms. That's a huge amount of time being spent in that. And so for those passive investors who are now going out and spending massive times trying to sue a company, that's a huge amount of time. In index funds, when do you sell? When do you buy? You're constantly speculating on that. You've got your 4% rule. When do you draw that down? So, there's lots of things going on that certainly aren't passive. And it's a matter of kind of looking into that. But again, I would challenge the notion of, if you're going to have a passive portfolio and you're not going to be working, what are you going to just watch TV all day or travel full time? That's eventually going to feel like you're going to be wanting to do something more with the time that you've got.
Yeah, no, that all makes a huge amount of sense. Michael, it's been a pleasure chatting to you this morning. Thanks so much for your time. Before I let you go, how can we find out more about your work? And I understand you have a podcast as well, so give us a quick plug.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. So I have a podcast here in Ireland. It's called the Irish Fire Podcast. It's available on all good podcast platforms, and the website there is firepodcast.ie. If you're interested in following what I'm doing with the native trees, I have a Facebook page up there called lovetrees.ie. It's had some amazing traction. It's only a couple of weeks old, but already it's got a great following. So if you want to sort of stay tuned to see what I'm going to be doing there, then certainly check that Facebook page out.
Wonderful. We'll make sure we put links in our show notes so our listeners can find the podcast and find your native trees project as well. That's wonderful. Michael, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Martin. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Michael, for joining us today on Informed Choice Radio. I genuinely enjoyed that conversation. Some really interesting learning points coming out of that. As I said in the introduction, no two fire practitioners I come across are the same. They don't all follow exactly the same path. And Michael really highlighted in that conversation some of the key differences and key beliefs and philosophies behind his own fire journey, which I found fascinating. So thank you, Michael. I'll put a link to the Irish Fire podcast in the show notes for this episode, which you can find at icradio.co.uk. Do do check it out. Do please support our fellow podcasters, particularly in this financial independence space. It's always good to help them along as well. Until next time, thank you for listening. I'm Martin Bamford. This is Informed Choice Radio. And remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.